I joined the truck out of stubbornness and silence. Previously, I used to unload pallets at a warehouse near Knoxville. Too many people, too much noise. In the truck, it's me, engine, and cargo. That week, I was hauling parts from a traveling truck park. Track segments, arched columns, diamond surface platforms, all atop a 3-axle RGN, oversized load front and rear. The stretch was West Texas on US 285, patched asphalt, flares streaking the sky, and the wind smelling of hot diesel. The agreed-upon escort would pick me up after Mentone. I pulled into a gravel pullout at 11:45 p.m., checked the turnstiles, hit the wedges, and adjusted the radio. CB had been dead since Kermit. My cell phone, worse. At 12 past midnight, an amber LED lit up ahead. A white hatchback low on the roof, oversized, plastered crookedly on the hood. A boy jumped out with a reflective vest, clipboard, and a flashlight that alternated green and red in perfect rhythm. "Are you Ruthie?" he asked seriously. I nodded. His manner was that of a scale inspector. "There are too many potholes ahead. I'll guide you through a bypass, keep it 3 lengths wide, and turn off the auxiliary lights. There's something on the track." I don't like obeying strangers, but his gesture was so automatic that my hand switched off the auxiliary controls. The hatchback took off smoothly. I followed in low beam, revving slowly so as not to rattle the tracks. The road seemed drawn with a ruler. The baton stuck out the driver's side window like an antenna. A few minutes later, another identical pilot car pulled up behind me. Same amber light, same stickers. Unusual for an empty stretch. In the rearview mirror, the guy in the car behind me was also brandishing a baton, as if he were dubbing the one in front half a second late. The leading hatchback took me off Highway 285 onto a service lane with no sign. It wasn't on my registration form. Barbed wire, dark tanks, the carcass of an abandoned bus. The radio crackled in the cabin. I didn't remember turning it on. Further to the left, the boy's voice. It didn't come from the speaker. It vibrated in the dashboard, as if the cockpit were speaking. "How many of you are there?" I asked. A short silence. Then, "Enough to keep you safe." The hold came straight, unintentionally, like an elevator warning. I kept my hands clenched on the steering wheel, feeling the worn leather. Up ahead, a farm gate open at one end. The hatchback indicated the turn with the green stick. I glanced at the reflection in the door glass, checking the angle, and saw, in the stick, my cabin reflected. Bandana on the overhead mirror, sticker on the sun visor, empty driver's seat. My foot didn't lift off the accelerator. With that kind of load, braking in surprise was bad news. I searched for plausible possibilities. Angle, lens, dust. The dust, by the way, was wrong. The amber LED blinked correctly, but it didn't really kick up dust. The dust hovered near the bumper like stagnant smoke. We entered a stretch of caliche that gleamed white in the moonlight. Horsepower pumps rose and fell on the horizon. The oil temperature rose a finger, the back of my neck another 2. Sometimes a word would appear in the cabin, right, caution, and then, shortly after, the same word, identical, came softer, like a transmission delay. It was the car behind repeating itself. We reached a narrow farm bridge with no guardrails. For this kind of thing, a real escort for a wide truck makes you stop, coordinate a gesture, give instructions. The guy raised his green baton as if to say, "Go." The car behind nudged its nose closer to my bumper, insistent. I glanced at the reflection in the baton again, the passenger seat empty, but my bandana in the mirror. There. It was just me. I don't know how to describe the decision. It was labor-intensive. I pulled the master switch from the dashboard, the cylinder that kills everything, headlights, instruments, CB. For a second, I became a ton of shadow. The night swallowed the noise like a studio door closing. At the same moment, both hatchbacks froze. They didn't break. They froze as if someone had pressed pause. The rotating beacon lost its rhythm until it went out. The boy's stick turned white, then disappeared. And the still dust remained still, with no wind in its way. I returned only the essentials. Ignition, low beam, no auxiliary lights. I didn't honk. I shifted the front end to the left, slowly rounded the corner, held the load, and returned to the main lane. It took a second for my eyes to remember the darkness. That was enough time for my legs to tremble. Second gear, third gear, 50 miles an hour. The 285 reappeared with a sigh of asphalt. At the top of the next rise, the CB breathed. A short static and a female voice, half laughing, said, "Back, back, back." All three words the same tone. I flipped to channel 9, then 13, nothing. I stopped at a hunter's retreat to check the lashings. The air held the warm temperature of a car parked in the sun. Ratchets were firm, corner guards in place. On the iron of the gooseneck, a shiny scratch I hadn't remembered, like a scrape from a trowel. I ran my finger over it. It was just filings. Turning around, I started the idiotic checklist we make to feign control. Footprints, only mine. Light in the distance? None. Sound? Wind and a coyote. I went back to the cabin to write it down. When I slammed the door, I saw a clipboard on the passenger floor mat. A chrome clip, blank pages. On the metal, my last name scratched from end to end, crooked writing like someone using a nail. I had locked the cabin. Dust from the window seal remained intact. I swallowed hard and covered the clipboard with my fluorescent jacket on the passenger seat as if covering a child. I drove, looking for familiar signs. Monaghan's, Fort Stockton, anything that would bring me back to the map. I passed 2 water haulers climbing, an owl passing close to the windshield, and a solitary church announcing in LED lights, "Pray for the fields." I breathed again, as if returning to my own head. I pulled into a truck stop at 2:50 a.m. The lot was packed, diesel was cheap for the area, and electricity was plentiful. I pulled up next to a noisy refrigerator just for company. At the store, I ordered a giant coffee and a bag of ice for the cooler. I paid with a card and, on impulse, wrote the time and the pump number on the receipt, as if to prove it to myself. On the way out, I came across another oversized man, a shirt with a park logo, a coffee cap in his teeth. "Going to the event in Midland?" he said cordially. "Going," I replied. "Will the escort pick you up in Mentone?" he asked, as if talking about the weather. "Take it," I said, and felt my stomach turn into a knot. He pointed to my oversized rear, which was sagging in an elastic band. I reinforced it. Before climbing in, I took out the clipboard and stuck it under the seat. The metal edge scraped against the seat rail. The sound gave me chills. As I closed the door, the CB turned on by itself at a low volume. A male voice, deeper than the boy's, repeated, with the same millimeter delay I'd heard outside, "You brought all the papers." I unscrewed the microphone and dropped it into the holder. I started the engine, the air rising, the dashboard lights steady. I drove off slowly, skirting the cameras and people, like someone navigating a lighthouse. The road is a line. It continues even when we wish it would turn into a lit room. I didn't call the police. Not for fear of being disbelieved, but because I didn't know which box to put cars that freeze when I turn everything off. I gave myself the usual speech: tiredness, the desert that repeats itself, temperamental electronics. It worked well enough to get me through the night. The rest of the trip was uneventful. The sun rose in orange bars, the radio returned to normal, the clipboard sitting motionless under the seat like a stone. I delivered the parts on time, unloaded them in the light rain, and got a receipt. I slept in Pecos at a motel that advertised hot showers as if it were luxury. I woke twice to the sound of a door in the hallway, and both times I was certain someone stood in the crack to hear if I was breathing. Since then, I've changed one habit. When a pilot car pulls up with a waving baton, I turn off everything, just for a second, to see if it freezes. To make sure the most alive thing there is me. Sometimes it doesn't freeze. Sometimes the traffic light stays green. The boy smiles and tells me to stop before the bridge. I stop. We exchange gestures, and life goes on as usual. Other times, no pilot car appears, and I cross alone, glancing twice in the mirror to see if I'm sitting where I should be. And there are nights, few but they do exist, when I swear I hear a voice in the cockpit that isn't mine repeating this softly, "Enough to keep you safe." In the morning, this hold turns to dust, like the dust on the shoulder. But as soon as night falls in the west, the flares come on. The wind blows under the chassis. My finger is already searching, unintentionally, for the master on the dashboard, just to check where the road ends and where the road begins, only when I let it. Spring 2018. I was traveling along US 50, carrying a disassembled Ferris wheel cabin, one of those blue capsules with the plexiglass visor, from the Fallon Fair to a warehouse near Ely. It wasn't a particularly heavy load, but it was a pain to secure. Strapping it where it wouldn't scratch, foam to avoid marking the plexiglass, and being careful not to let the capsule doors vibrate. I drove at night because of the desert wind. With the sun, any gust of wind can throw you into the lane of non-existent people. After midnight, the process becomes automatic. The temperature gauge stuck at 9 degrees 6, the tachograph drawing the line, channel 19 just making that frying pan hiss. I like US 50 because it's a thread on the map. If you don't invent fashion, there are no surprises. But that night, surprise invented fashion. About 40 minutes after Austin, a portable electronic weighbridge appeared on the shoulder, flashing scales open. There was no dot truck, no cab light on. Even so, I lowered my axles, signaled, and entered. While I was still in the driveway, the sign changed. NV8C72 Proceed, 72,480. My license plate and an approximate weight. Before I stepped on the scale, I hadn't passed any cameras. I stood over the plate. It rattled off the same number, pound for pound. In the little house, the receipt printer woke up on its own and spit out a piece of paper with my dot and departure time 1:17. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 1:14. I called the CB. Anyone at 19 see the Dry Creek scale working? Just static. I waited until 1:18, hoping an inspector would show up and tell me to go. No one. I stubbornly took the receipt, folded it, and put it on the clipboard. I returned to the lane feeling like I'd signed a script I hadn't written. At the next stop, an unmarked station with old pumps with green visors, I pulled over just to stretch my legs. In the card slot for pump 2, there was a receipt stuck. My carrier's name misspelled, 0 liters, value 0.0, and the same future time as the scale. The paper was lukewarm, no one in the yard, just an ice cooler rattling inside as if something were trapped. I continued. The Ferris wheel capsule reflected my headlights like a calm eye as I checked the belts in the mirror. The doors, locked with annealed wire, rattled softly inside the canvas. Every 20 miles, another moving panel. Same thing. Proceed. My license plate, my weight 3 minutes ahead. It wasn't the same equipment moving behind me. It was different, marking the clock ahead of mine. I decided to break with the routine. I turned right off US 50 onto a BLM access road I'd only heard about. Packed dirt, salty brush, and room for a truck and a half. I turned off my headlights for 20 seconds. When I turned them back on, the distance sign back on the main road changed from proceed to slow, and then went dark. It made my stomach turn. I was off the road, and someone was still tracking my steps. I stood there too long, listening to the turbo diesel breathe and the wind whipping grains of sand against the windshield. I got out. The sky was filled with those stars that looked like metal dust. I walked around, hand on the straps, hand on the rubber. Arriving at the capsule, I saw light reflected where it shouldn't. The light was coming from inside, a faint glow behind the acrylic. I stuck my head in to see where it was coming from. There was no wiring, no battery. On the capsule floor, just the little street sign with a number and a paper label stuck on it. E12, exit 0305. I looked at my watch. 0302. I climbed in so fast, I banged my knee on the cockpit step. I turned it on, headed back to US 50. The panels didn't reappear. No people, no radio, not a pair of coyote eyes. Just the nagging certainty that the blue capsule had its own agenda, and I was its chosen draft horse. I arrived at the warehouse near dawn. The foreman greeted me without coffee, just with that clipboard that's ready before you get off. Are you Mario? No. He checked the capsule number, wrote down E12, received 0307. 2 minutes later than the label, I signed something. Before leaving, he handed me back a piece of paper. You forgot this. It was the third copy of my scale receipt, with a stamp I hadn't seen. Pre-audited. I still do Nevada, only during the day. Electronic billboards give me the creeps, even those advertising signs in Reno. And when I see a parking lot load, I check the cabin inside as if it were fine china. But also for another reason. to see if there's a schedule waiting for me. Two things I learned outside of the manual. Some roads run a few minutes ahead of us, and some roads navigate in the dark on their own, using us only as a motor. I'm not one to make speeches. I'm one to meet delivery windows. 12 years of pulling all-nighters, almost always in dry conditions, sometimes in refrigerated conditions when the broker pays for the headache-inducing fuel. What I like is the desert straight away. Side winds, open skies, and a never-ending horizon. That Tuesday, however, the dispatcher put me on a route I usually avoid, leaving Deming bound for Shiprock, cutting through the low mountains and valleys of New Mexico outside my usual route. It was light cargo, boxes of groceries, and a tight deadline. I accepted because I wanted to be awake on my cell phone when my son called from his quarters to let me know if he'd actually signed the Navy contract. A promise is a promise. I left after sunset, thermos full of thin coffee, CB at a volume barely noticeable, ELD set to good. The heat was left behind as the air began to feel drier, that cold that bites your nose. Windows open a crack so my face wouldn't give in, APU silent. On AM, gospel music in Spanish when the terrain allowed, static silence when the hills cut the signal. No cell phone, nothing, just me, the set, and the pitch black. That road didn't have endless climbs or mountain curves to flip through. Even so, it played its tricks. There were stretches of worn paint and invisible speed bumps that make you swear the wheel is square. Eyes stinging on a day full of pallet trucks and paperwork. I had sworn internally, if I weighed my eyelids down, I'd pull over to the first shady corner. The watch didn't help. Ice on my wrist, water on the back of my neck, 65 miles of cruising, slowing down when the wind came from the side. Almost 1 in the morning, a green sign flashed up ahead. Mesa de Toro picnic area, 2 miles. Great, I thought. Restroom, stretch my legs, fill my bottle, check my belt and pegs. But when I got to the supposed entrance, what I saw was a mouth of cracked asphalt, a crooked pole without a light fixture, and a rusty concrete base where a sign had once stood. I drove straight past, made a joke on the CB. Breaker 19, they stole a picnic area here. And the void responded only with a hiss. 2-3 minutes, and there was another identical sign. Mesa de Toro picnic area, 2 miles. Same typography, reflective material shining, nothing wrong at first glance. I laughed to myself, that short laugh of someone who doesn't want to bother anyone. They doubled the advertising, but the feeling lingered. I opened the window a fraction wider, let the cold in, and that's when the dashboard pinched me. 117. Okay. I drove a bit, looked again. 117. A bit more, the odometer rising, the frequency of the beeping changing depending on the terrain, and 117. My watch said 134. Stubborn module, I grumbled. Trucks lie sometimes. A naughty sensor, a bitten connector. You learn not to give them any leash. To get over my bad luck, I decided to pull over for real. Any ranch pullout would do. But the road decided to make things easier. A new, spotless sign, shining like a Sunday best. Mesa de Toro picnic area, 1 mile. I slowed down early, long-standing fear of deer crossing, and used my right turn signal in advance. The access road was narrow and crumbling, but it held the whole thing together. I entered slowly. Headlights swept over concrete tables, a low pole, a shelter with a corrugated metal roof. 2 yellow lights insisted on staying on, an old drinking fountain in front of a small beige-tiled restroom building. The dashboard blinked and settled. The ELD screen beeped duty status on inspection without me touching anything. I switched off in neutral. The engine quieted down until all that was left was the ticking of cooling metal and a whisper of electricity in the air, like when a transformer complains. I got out with the flashlight. The floor was too hard for the place. The cold was too much. Bathroom? Later. First, what was mine? I turned the assembly, tires, hoses, pins, rear door seal. I ran my hand over the inner belt ratchet through the opening, everything tight. The shelter trembled at the side of my vision. When I turned my head, it stopped. It wasn't fear. It was disarray, a memory of an old neighborhood visited many years later. On the wall next to it, a payphone. The metal guide was broken. The receiver tapped slowly against the column. That silly noise irritated me. I picked up the receiver to put it back in its cradle. It pressed against my ear, and I heard the rumble of an old heavy diesel engine idling like a slow hammer. It wasn't mine. I recognized mine. And behind me, deep inside, I heard my own hello, with a half-second delay, like a radio picking up two stations. I dropped the receiver and it fell stubbornly back down. The CB crackled without me touching the mic. 7581 is clear the lane, mate. Deep, muffled, with an accent lacking a map. 7581 is the last 4 digits of my DOT painted on the door. Public information, sure, but no one starts a conversation in the middle of the night by reciting someone else's number like that. I pressed the PTT. Received. Who's speaking? Just static. I let go. The same phrase came again, identical, syllable by syllable, like a tape repeating, 7581, clear the lane, mate. I turned off the CB with the key. The light took a little longer than usual to die. Lack of water and too much paranoia, I said to myself, half laughing. I went to the water fountain. I pressed the button. A thin, cold stream came out, tasting of rust. Behind the shelter, the road ran in the dark. A red tower blinked on the horizon. 3 blinks and pause, 3 blinks and pause. I glanced at the spotlights on the side of the trailer. With the warning lights off, they still returned the light in triplets, as sure as a metronome. I walked back to the cabin carefully, like someone crossing a living room in the dark without kicking the sofa. On the dashboard, 117. On the ELD, inspection, 002132. I tapped the screen, frozen. I took off my cap, scratched the back of my neck, and tapped it with my knuckle. It woke up as if nothing had happened. To keep track, I took the grease pen and wrote in large letters on the corner of the windshield. 134, the time on my wrist. I put it in gear, released the parking brake, and slowly pulled out of the area. The return trip seemed longer than the arrival. I almost needed the light traction to overcome the rubber boots protecting the entrance. I lined up, found the lanes. On the right, a mile marker, 117. I recorded it out of habit, followed. 2 minutes, and another 117. I slowed down. Third 117. I switched on the alert for a moment, breathed from my diaphragm, left my hand open on the steering wheel. The world moved on. The odometer said so, the wind said so, but the numbers swore I was circling the same square on the map. To distract myself, I turned on the radio again. A woman came in singing, an old hymn, the sweetest Spanish, but with strange cuts. Pauses where they shouldn't have, as if someone had edited the tape with blunt scissors. Play on the service shoulder, side, 5th wheel, don't be stubborn. He came in the CB without a prefix, without a call. The way he phrased it was my father's. Not the timbre my ear knows how to distinguish, but the cadence, the negations before the advice. I obeyed before thinking, old conditioning. I slammed on the brakes, aimed for the dirt road parallel to the fence, and when the front end met the gravel, the whole thing gave that nice bounce like someone leaving the asphalt in one piece. I stopped on a flat surface. The sky, high and pale with stars, twinkled behind a gauze of cloud. The dust I'd kicked up took a while to decide where to fall. Silence with a hole in it. The thin hiss of a poorly tuned radio within it. I pointed the flashlight at the overhead lines. The service one, blue, had something stuck to it. I got closer. A faded indigo handkerchief streaked with white, tied in a careful knot. The smell of an old closet. That hadn't been there when I left Deming, nor since. I would have seen it. I calmly loosened the knot, put the fabric in the cup holder. I went to the 5th wheel, flashlight passing through, pin, locks, plate, all secure. Side 5th wheel, no fuss. It echoed again, but now only in my memory. Okay, old man, I replied quietly to nothing. I climbed in, turned it on. Normal sequence of lights. Time, 1:17. I looked at the window with my note, 134. It was still there, shiny with grease. It gave me a silly comfort. Turn signal lane. The next marker said 123. I breathed differently. At 124, I smiled. We were out of the loop. From then on, the night returned to the way I know it. Eyes on the shoulder that turned to stone when illuminated, wind pushing sideways in a gust, a stone mesa silhouetted against the sky. No more Toro table. When my cell phone sighed a tiny bar of signal, already close to dawn, the dispatcher texted, "Don't forget to geofence the first drop. A driver took a shortcut." I replied, "Okay," and left it at that. How do you explain geofence to a piece of the map that decides to become a rewindable tape? I delivered it to Shiprock with the sun beating down on the docks. The supervisor stamped it without looking too closely, letting me go for a nap. Beforehand, I opened the ELD to send a log. It was there. 17-minute stop at Mesa de Toro Picnic Area, 01-17-01-34. Status, inspection complete. I took a picture. The picture came out. I didn't choose that menu at the time. I know what I touched and what I didn't. Someone or something advanced the service for me. Truly asleep, it was already past 2 in the afternoon. I went for a burrito and coffee at a diner near the patio. At the counter was a man with a cap and a wide buckle, the look of someone who calls the road by its nickname. I asked bluntly, "Have you heard of Mesa de Toro?" He gave a smirk. "Did you see the signs too?" I swallowed hard. He told me about a small area near an arroyo closed in the 1990s by a nasty fire after a tank burst. They never rebuilt, but the streetlight stood for a while, and people swore by the power where there was no power. The phone that sent back the sound of trucks, the road that stopped the clock's hands. He said maintenance had erased the 117 marker, and it had come back painted by someone or something. He shrugged. "History is what's left when the dust settles. Take something blue in your mirror when you cross there. My aunt's people used to say it clears the way." I walked back, laughing at myself. The indigo handkerchief was still in the cup holder. I smoothed the fabric between my fingers. There was a crooked seam in the corner, a hasty fix. I tied a simple knot in the side mirror mount, letting the end dangle. The phone vibrated. It was my boy. I answered on speakerphone. My voice was firm, fear well hidden, pride that tickles my chest. I didn't tell him anything about what had happened. He doesn't need to carry the traffic of my nights. I just said the world is huge and sometimes likes to play games with us, but a road is a road. Stay in your lane, check your parking, note the odd one, and move on to the next milestone. On the way back empty, I stopped at a gas station with a hardware store. I picked up a kit of reflective triangles, the kind that change color depending on the angle. I opened the box in the cabin. It was missing one triangle. In its place, neatly folded, was another blue scarf, identical, with the same crooked stitching. It wasn't shelf dust. And, with the CB still off, someone said softly, "Breathe. Hold." I took a breath. I tied the second scarf to the microphone like a ribbon on a party hat. I headed out onto the road with 2 blues dancing lightly. The signs passed as they should. The markers counted accurately. The dashboard clock clashed with the one on my wrist a few more times, but now I understood the message. There's a part of the map where time gnaws at its own tail. You don't argue. Check the 5th wheel, keep it, and cross. In the rearview mirror, I swear to God I saw for a second an old tandem, beige paintwork flashing its headlights in thanks. I winked back, out of politeness and superstition, and I saved the lesson for when someone asks me again where that Mesa de Toro is. I'll smile toothlessly and say, "If you need to cross that way, take something blue and write the time on the window, in case the world decides to rewind a little."